Antonio, have you ever stopped to think if this money is really going to last us for the rest of our lives?
Of course it will. I worked my whole life for this. This is the silent mistake of thousands of retirees. If you want to understand, watch until the end.
Have you ever noticed how there's something strange happening with retirement? Something that almost no one can explain properly, but that every retiree feels in their daily life? The benefit amount even goes up. The adjustment is announced. The numbers look positive on paper, but the real feeling is always the same. The money doesn't last as long. And this perception doesn't arise from a shock nor from a sudden crisis. It's born from a silent discomfort that appears when you leave the store with fewer bags than before, when your usual medication weighs heavier on the budget, or when the bill arrives and demands a cut you never imagined having to make. It's at this point that many people start asking themselves where they went wrong, when, in reality, the problem was never in their individual choices. For decades, retirement was sold as a secure endpoint, a moment of rest after years of contribution, effort, and sacrifice. The logic seemed fair and simple. Work while you can, contribute to the system, and, in the end, receive an income that would guarantee peace of mind. This promise shaped important decisions. People accepted difficult jobs, gave up opportunities, left dreams for later, all sustained by the idea that the future would be protected. And for a long time, this model worked reasonably well. The problem is that the world changed profoundly, while the structure of retirement remained practically frozen in time. When the benefit starts being paid, there's an initial relief. Predictability brings security. Money comes in every month, bills get paid, and there's a feeling that the hardest phase is behind you. But gradually, something starts not to fit. The month seems shorter. Money goes out faster. Small increases accumulate without making noise. Nothing explodes all at once. Nothing draws enough attention to generate immediate alarm. And that's exactly why the impact is so dangerous. It doesn't provoke reaction, only constant adaptation. The retiree starts adjusting habits almost without realizing it. First, switching brands at the store. Then comparing prices more carefully. Next, cutting out a small pleasure that previously seemed harmless. Gradually, what was an exception becomes a rule, and the standard of living is redesigned downward. The cruelest part is that at no point is there a clear warning that this is part of a structural process. On the contrary, the dominant narrative makes it seem like everything is within normal bounds, that the annual adjustment protects a benefit, and that any difficulty is a result of personal choices. The adjustment, by the way, is one of the most misunderstood aspects of retirement. Every beginning of the year, the numbers are announced. The benefit was corrected for official inflation. The index was applied. On paper, it seems fair. But the inflation used to correct retirement is a broad average of the population's consumption. It considers products and services that often aren't part of the retiree's routine. Meanwhile, the expenses that really weigh on the budget rise at a different pace. Medications, consultations, health plans, basic food, energy, and housing typically increase above that average. The result is simple and cruel. The benefit does go up, but the cost of living rises faster. This mismatch doesn't appear blatantly. It manifests as a small difference at first. A few dollars more here, an adjustment there, but that difference doesn't disappear. It accumulates. Year after year, the distance between the adjustment and the real cost of living grows. In 5 years, the impact is already noticeable. In 10, it completely redefines financial reality. The retiree begins living with fewer choices, less margin, and more worry. And yet, many believe this is just a natural course of life, without realizing they're trapped in a mechanism that continuously erodes purchasing power. Another factor that worsens this situation is the loss of financial flexibility. While you're working, cost increases can be compensated somehow. Extra work, supplementary income, a change in position. In retirement, that flexibility practically disappears. Income becomes rigid, fixed, predictable, but expenses remain variable and often unpredictable. Any unexpected expense weighs more heavily. An unexpected consultation, a new medication, a home repair, all of this demands difficult choices because there's no room to absorb impacts. Over time, this rigidity creates a constant state of alert. The retiree begins watching every expense, even the small ones, lives with fear of the end of the month, with fear of an unplanned expense, with fear of getting sick. This worry isn't just financial, it's emotional. Retirement, which should represent peace of mind, becomes associated with constant worry. And this rarely enters the discussion when talking about numbers, indexes, and rules. There's also a historical element that weighs on many benefits. Economic changes, monetary plans, pension reforms, and transition rules affected the calculation basis of countless retirements. Many benefits started out behind. They're adjusted over time, but always based on a value that was already compromised from birth. This problem doesn't correct itself over the years. On the contrary, it perpetuates and amplifies. The retiree carries this silent gap throughout their entire life. The complexity of the system contributes to all of this going unnoticed. Technical terms, indexes, formulas, and exceptions create a barrier to understanding. Most people feel something is wrong, but can't identify exactly where. And when you don't understand the problem, it becomes almost impossible to react to it consciously. This lack of clarity generates immobility. The retiree adapts, adjusts, conforms, believing there's no alternative. Meanwhile, comparison with the past becomes inevitable. The retiree remembers how they lived at the beginning of retirement. There was more breathing room, more choices, more freedom. Over the years, that margin disappears. The present seems tighter than the past, even without major changes in lifestyle. This perception generates frustration, but offers no clear answers. And without answers, the cycle continues. What's most concerning is that this process affects practically everyone who depends exclusively on retirement. It doesn't matter if the initial amount was higher or lower. The logic is the same. Money loses strength while the cost of living advances. For some, the squeeze arrives earlier. For others, it takes a bit longer. But the destination tends to be similar. Retirement guarantees survival, but doesn't protect standard of living over time. Meanwhile, official discourse continues focused on rules, minimum age, contribution time, and system sustainability. Little is said about the after, about what it's actually like to live on retirement for 10, 15, 20 years. Little is said about the psychological impact of gradual loss of purchasing power. Little is said about the silent fear that accompanies many retirees. This silence contributes to millions of people going through this believing they're alone. Understanding this dynamic completely changes the way you view retirement. It removes the weight of individual blame. It shows that the problem isn't in spending poorly, but in living in a system that doesn't keep up with the reality of the cost of living. It shows that the annual adjustment isn't complete protection, just a partial buffer. And this awareness is fundamental to facing retirement with more clarity, without illusions and without false promises. The truth is that retirement, the way it works today, demands constant attention. It demands understanding that time works against the value of money. It demands recognizing that ignoring this process doesn't prevent it from happening. On the contrary, the later the realization comes, the greater the accumulated impact. It's not about panic, but about clarity, about seeing the scenario as it really is. When you observe your own trajectory and compare how you lived at the beginning of retirement with how you live now, the difference becomes evident. Money no longer allows the same choices. The budget became more rigid. The safety margin decreased. And this didn't happen all at once. It happened gradually. That's precisely why it's so hard to identify when it began. And that's precisely why so many retirees keep asking themselves where they went wrong. Retirement should be a phase of tranquility, but for many it transforms into a constant exercise in adaptation, adjusting expenses, reviewing habits, giving up small things that previously seemed simple. Each sacrifice carries emotional weight, a feeling of loss, not just financial, but of quality of life. And none of this appears in official numbers. This is the truth that almost no one explains directly, not because it's impossible to understand, but because it's uncomfortable, because it exposes fragility in the system, because it shows that retirement alone doesn't solve anyone's financial future. It guarantees the minimum, and even then, with growing difficulties. Understanding this doesn't change the past, but it changes how you face the present. It helps you understand that the feeling that money runs out faster isn't imagination. It's a consequence, a model that doesn't keep pace with real life. And as long as this isn't said clearly, many will continue carrying a guilt that was never theirs. In the end, the question isn't why retirement seems smaller. The question is why the illusion was created that it would be protected from time. Time doesn't forgive the value of money. It erodes slowly what seems solid. And recognizing this is a first step to stop being surprised by the silent squeeze that so many retirees live with every day.